Hey everybody, welcome back to Sophisticakes, and if you're new, welcome to Sophisticakes. For this video, I am doing another cake top forward cake, a new trend that I think is just really pretty. And this time I did a hexagon cake with some other geometric pattern accents, some marbled fondant, and some wafer paper flowers. So if this sounds interesting to you, please stay tuned and watch, and I'll get you all the details right after the intro. So the first thing we needed to do is get our cake ready for the decorations. And I started with two 10-inch round cakes that are about 1.5 inches tall, some parchment paper that I will use in a way that I will show you in a bit. And this is my template for the pattern that I wanted to put on the cake. And some greaseproof cake boards, an X-Acto knife, and a pencil. And I also have this large sheet cake board and a ruler. Now this is my little trick on how to make a hexagon. If you don't have hexagon pans, or if you need a size that you don't have, this is a helpful little trick. Go ahead and mark out the circumference of the cake that you're working with a pencil, and then cut it out. Fold your circle in half. This is key. This is such a simple trick. Now you need to fold it in thirds from this half. Now I kind of eyeball it. You can measure it out if you want to, but I kind of eyeball it. Fold it one side in and fold the other side on top of it. Now use your ruler and draw a line from one corner to the other with your pencil. There you can see your line. And cut that off. Now you're going to end up with a triangle shape. Open it up, and there is your hexagon. Ta-da! Jazz hands. So I took that shape and I transferred it onto this cake board. Now I'm making the board that's going to go underneath the cake and on top of the cake so that I can get some crisp corners. Little cheater on how to frost this cake. I made 2 of these. I cut 2 of these. And I'm using my pencil to mark so that we know which side is which. That way you're aligning up your boards on top and bottom so that the sides are all even. Now I went ahead and I cut the tops off on these 2 cakes, and then I cut them in half again. You don't have to do this. I just wanted it a little thicker or a little taller. I don't know what the word would be for when you're sitting it on its side. And I'm just putting them on these pieces of parchment. You can use wax paper if you want to, because I find that it is easier to cut your shape if they are chilled. So I put them on the parchment and put them in the freezer for a good 15 minutes just to firm them up. And take them out of your fridge or freezer, I'm sorry. And then I'm filling with ganache, chocolate ganache, because I find that when you're gonna stand a cake on your side, I just feel more comfortable having something a little more sturdy. Because once that ganache sets, it's going to hold those layers together. Peace of mind. You can do it with buttercream if you prefer. I'm just not taking a chance. So I'm using ganache in between all of my layers. Then use one of your boards as your guide on cutting the shape out. And I did pop it back in the freezer again for another 10 minutes. It's easier to carve a cake when it is chilled. And when you're doing this, use a serrated knife, a long serrated knife. A bread knife would work great for this. And cut down and try to be conscious of the fact that you want these sides to be level. Try not to cut them at an angle. Sometimes it happens and you can fill it in with buttercream a little bit. So there's a little margin for error, but just do your best to try to make sure that that is not an issue. I'm using ganache on the outside to crumb coat. Again, for stability. Now make sure that you put some ganache on the top and the bottom as well. I didn't have much left, so I just used a thin coat. Pop it in your freezer so that it firms up. And there I was showing you that this is the front of the cake, that I'm lining up those boards so that your shape turns out right. See, there's the one pencil mark on one, lines up with the pencil mark on the bottom. And just use your hand and your eyes and your scraper to try to make sure that they are lined up. Now I am using my buttercream in a piping bag to fill in the gap between the two boards. That's how you're going to get your level flush sides. And I find with those corners, if you pack that buttercream in those corners like that, just from the very beginning, you drag less of it off. You just need to make sure you have enough in those corners, and then fill in between those corners. A little reinforcement, and use your smoother to remove the excess. Now you're going to do another coat of this, so if they're not perfect and exactly filled in this time, it's okay, because you're going to go back and you're going to go ahead and fill it in again. And I find working from side to side on a corner is kind of the best way to get a sharper corner. That way you're not removing more out of those corners than you have to. Now pop it in the freezer for another 10 minutes to firm up, and go back in and do your second coat. And now is the time to pay more attention to those clean corners. And I do find a heated up metal scraper kind of gives you the best smooth results. I popped it back in the fridge and turned it over, and I'm doing a coat of buttercream on the other side. And take some time to pull in those corners. You don't want to put a lot of pressure as you're pushing down. Just kind of let the weight of the scraper be your resistance and just pull it towards you. So I do the corners first, and then I do the straight edges. Actually, here is where I'm turning it upside down and putting it in the freezer. And I use the parchment paper on it with a board so that when you are ready to turn it back over again, you don't have it sticking to the board. And definitely make sure that you chill it in between adding the buttercream to the front and back side. I used fondant, gray fondant, to make the outline of the pattern. I just rolled it out nice and thin, tried to cut off some excess, rounded edges, because you're going to need strips, and then I set it aside and let it firm up for a few minutes. Then I went back in and I cut some strips. You can use a strip cutter if you want, but this time I just went ahead and eyeballed it. And to fill in those geometric patterns, randomly placed, I didn't want to have them all filled in, I did some marbled fondant with some blue and some moss green and some white. And a little bit of black, I believe. Now this is where I am plotting out my attack, I guess I should say. I don't know. I'm using that template that I drew out to line up my pieces. And then once they are in place, I kind of let it firm up a little bit before I transfer it on to the cake. It's a little easier to work with fondant when it's not so soft, especially when it's going to be on a flat surface. If you need it to go around a curved edge, you want to work with it a little bit sooner. And I'm just using my X-Acto knife to cut a diagonal line in between where the corners meet, and then you remove the excess. That's a little helpful hint there too. I removed the template just so that I could see a little bit better what I was doing with the black of my counter behind it. And then I cut out the pieces that I wanted to use with the fondant, to use those as templates as well. Just use my X-Acto knife on my self-healing mat. And then line them up on your fondant that you rolled out with the marble and cut those pieces out. And just place them in so that you know that they're the right size. So that when you go to transfer it over to your cake, you know that you will have minimal cutting to do. Now I'm just going to let you watch the placement of all this because it took a few minutes. I wanted this gray sections to actually be silver, so I used some silver luster dust and some vodka to make a paint out of it. And I'm just brushing it on just the outlined gray part. So once you get that all painted, go ahead and pop it back in your freezer because you're going to need to stand it on its side. Or on the bottom. So you need it to be nice and firm. And I'm sticking it to my board with just some buttercream, finding the edge and just sticking that board on it. And then tilting it all at once. I know it looks scary, but if you don't have anything underneath that cake board-wise and when you're transferring, it makes it a whole lot easier. And I made some wafer paper flowers that I'm using as my decoration. Now, wafer paper can have a tendency to want to melt when you stick it on buttercream. So for this cake, I just made sure that the wafer paper was not actually even touching the cake. I used some wires that are covered in floral tape, which makes it food safe. I do have footage of me making these flowers, and those will be on a future tutorial, possibly next week. And I wanted these to be in kind of an arch shape around the one side and have some height on top. And I wanted to bring some of that green in the fondant out. And the centers of these flowers were green. And the leaves. Use your designated cake pliers to help you guide those wires into the cake. You could always use straws to attach the flowers onto the cake if that makes you feel better. Either way, to me, is food safe. So there you go, guys. The hexagon shaped cake, top forward cake that I think is just gorgeous with some wafer paper flowers. If you like what you saw, please take a minute to subscribe and share and like and comment and let me know if you have any questions. As always, I appreciate you watching and we'll catch you next time. Thanks, guys. Bye.